honestly, the best part of David Tepper's press conference today was when he admitted he's got learning to do as an NFL owner. Straight up. Here's what he said.
Just in general, and I'll say this is 4 years in this business, 2 years during COVID. I'm still learning, quite frankly. We had dinner with some owner. Their family's been in the business for 40 years. Okay, I'm going to be humble enough to say that it's a big difference from being in the seat of a fan or being up here, and you're trying to balance. You just gave the question about patience both ways. You try to balance that and try to learn from your mistakes, and hopefully we're smart enough to do that.
So that's David Tepper, owner of the Carolina Panthers. I'd like to think that what he's saying is going to hold true. He's going to learn from his mistakes. This is somebody who talked about patience when he took over. He talked about patience when he hired Matt Rhule. He talked about going through a little bit of pain if it meant that it would give you sustained success, right? Instead, what David Tepper did was showed you no patience whatsoever, inconsistent on patience. The guy was ready to move on from all sorts of people all the time, but he wasn't ready to move on from Matt Rhule. The only thing I can think of is, well, he wanted to save some money. He wasn't ready to buy Matt Rhule out. So here's this exchange between Scott Fowler, columnist for the Charlotte Observer, and David Tepper at the end of the press conference, because at no point did Tepper really give you a reason why now was the time as opposed to at the end of last season. He could have easily said, look, we've got this plan we're trying to stick to. There are some measurables that I find important that told me I should give Matt Rhule an opportunity to see it through. Obviously, the wins didn't come, so now it's time to just go ahead and reset for the whatever the next plan is. Instead, we get exchanges like this.
Dave, this is just a timeline question, but did you wake up this morning and decide to do this? Did you know last night? I just wonder what your own decision process was here.
Scott, I read your column, okay? You know better, okay? Every day, this is an everyday thinking about things, how we can be better, what should we do, when is the right time, when's not the right time. And I said there's numerous factors that go into it. I answered that question before. There's a tipping point that gets reached. It just so happened we got to the tipping point. And I think you understand that.
But you're saying you're not very specific on what the reasons were other than you didn't win. I mean, is there something I'm missing other than that he's 11 and 27?
You want me to read? I could actually, I shouldn't say that, but I actually read your columns and I can go back to your columns and regurgitate them. So you can read your own columns, okay, for that answer.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave.
So that's David Tepper in an exchange with Scott Fowler, columnist for the Charlotte Observer. Essentially, David Tepper doing the media doesn't know anything, but admitting, yeah, everything you wrote, yeah, that's the reason why we fired him. Huh? Which one is it? Oh, I don't pay attention to what's going on, even though we know he looks at Twitter, and apparently he reads the Observer all the time. Giglio, you've dealt with this plenty of times, haven't you? Back in your beat writing days? No, I don't bother with that stuff. And yet, man, they always were ready to pull out some sort of stat that you might have busted out at any time.
There's any number of reasons for David Tepper to fire Matt Rhule.
Yeah.
And they can just be holistic.
Mm-hmm.
The guy gets hired in the NFL, doesn't have a plan at quarterback, number one. And by going into the meeting and saying, we're going to draft the next Patrick Mahomes is not a plan.
No.
Okay. Number two, you bring in a play caller from LSU who you said after you fire him within the first 2 years, I didn't know Joe Brady. Huh? You get your dream job. You get a check for $62 million over a 7-year period, and you're going to the NFL, and you don't call the plays yourself. The number one person on your staff is the play caller. You didn't know him? You didn't know that Joe Brady didn't call the plays at LSU? You didn't know that Joe Brady didn't run the practices at LSU? This is who you're entrusting your dream job to?
Remember when they roasted Teddy Bridgewater for saying they weren't practicing the 2-minute drill?
They weren't.
Because Joe Brady apparently didn't really know what he was doing in that regard.
Basics. These are basics. You win in the NFL in the red zone. You win in the NFL at the end of games and at the end of the halves.
Mm-hmm.
And how many different times do we see Matt Rhule roll out there and try a 70-yard field goal or mismanage the clock or not have his team in a position where they're ready to take advantage of an opportunity. How many different times did we see coaching malpractice out of Matt Rhule? He could have given any of those examples, David Tepper. He could have gone back to Matt Rhule's second game when on 4th and 2 from the Buccaneers, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, with Bruce Arians and Tom Brady, he decides to run a fake punt as if FIU or some directional Florida school was on Baylor's schedule that week, and he was going to pull the wool over their eyes on 4th and 2 from the opponent's 36-yard line. You got to be kidding me with that. The guy couldn't beat the teams he was supposed to, and he certainly couldn't beat the good teams in the league. 1-11 against the teams who finished with a record of 10 wins or more. 1-11. Never mind the 5-9 mark with the teams who won between 6 and 9 games. You can't beat the teams who are on your level, and you can't beat the teams above your level. You know where that leaves you? It leaves you back in college. And you know what? It might just work out for Matt Rhule back in college.
It might. There's nothing. By the way, there's nothing wrong with.
But
that.
also, let us not forget, at Baylor, when he was hired, David Tepper had such a frenzy that, oh my gosh, he's gonna go be the Giants coach. I'm gonna give him this contract. He didn't bother to look at his resume at Baylor. Yeah, but Joe, he rescued Baylor football. No. He went 0-11 against top 25 teams at Baylor. So he never beat anybody good at Baylor. And at some point in the NFL, guess what you got to do? You got to beat good teams.
There's two conversations here. There's the simplicity in the reason why Matt Rhule got fired today. It's pretty simple, as you laid out. He looked in over his head, and in a results-based business, the NFL, this isn't college, where your win-loss record, that's who you are.
With decisions you control, by the way.
This is true, too.
Go back to that Browns game this year where there's 11 seconds on the play clock when he snaps the ball when he doesn't have to.
Some decisions were his, some decisions were not. And that's where we get into the complicated portion of the conversation. And just how much David Tepper is at fault and just how much David Tepper is going to hold himself in accountability for the reason why the Carolina Panthers in 4 years went from optimism to a complete dumpster fire out in Charlotte. Because let's go through this. You talked about Joe Brady and whether or not, why is Matt Rhule bringing this guy on? Who's to say that David Tepper said, I want this guy because he's the hot name coming out of an LSU championship that was working with this quarterback who everybody loved, okay? Let's get back. I mean, you just hit it on the head when it came to Matt Rhule and why he got the job in the first place. Matt Rhule was coming out of Baylor as a hot coaching commodity. The Giants were in hot pursuit to get him. David Tepper, who has the money, wants to make a splash, okay? Well, that blew up in his face. Same with the Joe Brady thing. Patience. We heard a lot of patience today. Selective patience. We got to be patient here. We got to be patient there. Except that you've never shown any patience in anything that you've done. You bailed on your president. You bailed on a soccer coach. You bailed in Rock Hill when the terms of the deal, you went all Darth Vader on it. And you pray I don't change it any further. Well, you bailed on that. And here's the thing where I have the biggest problem. As much as Matt Rhule is to blame for a lot of the reasons why the Panthers are in the current state of things, David Tepper also has to own accountability for why he was the one who got impatient with Teddy Bridgewater and started chasing the shiny object. The next quarterback to go. I got to go get Matt Stafford. Well, Matt Stafford didn't want to go. Well, I got to get Deshaun Watson. Then the block got a little too hot with Deshaun Watson. He ends up with the Cleveland Browns. Well, who's the next? All right. Let's overpay for Sam Darnold because I just can't deal with Teddy anymore. If you had an actual plan, you would not have bailed on Teddy Bridgewater. You would have drafted the next quarterback. You would have then start building the team around that QB to then elevate him like we see at other places. And yet you didn't do any of that stuff. So, Matt Rhule had to get fired. You can't fire the owner, unfortunately. And things are not going to improve for the Carolina Hurricanes. Things are not going to improve for the Carolina Panthers until David Tepper gets that religion. Because, again, we see this time and again. Owners come in, they're splashy, they like the attention, and things might not go their way, and they have to take a step back and hire the right people. maybe, just maybe, David Tepper will hire the right people this go-round if he's to be believed when it comes to his learning process in the last 4 years.